Okay, so we're diving into some seriously fascinating stuff today. You've brought all these excerpts about, like, how the Bible was interpreted from the 14th to the 18th century and how it got caught up in these power struggles. It's kind of wild.
Absolutely. And what's so captivating, I think, is how those interpretations, they weren't just, theological debates happening in some ivory tower. They were used as tools, real tools in these struggles for political power.
So it's less about, like, what does the Bible actually say, and more about, like, who gets to decide what it means and, like, what they do with that power.
You got it. That's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're going to follow that thread from guys like Marsilius of Padua. He was all about secular control over religious interpretation, all the way through the Reformation, Luther, Henry VIII, the whole shebang. We'll even see how it paves the way for, like, modern biblical criticism with thinkers like Hobbes and Spinoza.
Whoa. Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with some knowledge.
Yeah.
Let's rewind to 14th century Europe. What's the scene? Like, what's going on that sets the stage for these changes in how people see the Bible?
Okay, so picture this. The Holy Roman Empire is on the decline. The papacy, total turmoil, and new philosophical ideas are, like, bubbling up everywhere, challenging the established order. Talk about a recipe for questioning authority. And not just any authority. We're talking the church's authority to, interpret the Bible.
And that's where our boy Marsilius of Padua steps in.
Right.
Tell me more about this guy. What's his deal?
So Marsilius, he's fascinating. He has this radical idea, at least for his time, He's like ultimate authority. It shouldn't be the church. It should be the secular ruler, the king. And get this, he uses scripture to make his case. Says the Bible should be interpreted for what? The good of the state. Can you imagine?
Wow, that's a bold move. The church must have been thrilled. So it's not even just like interpreting the Bible. It's like who gets to be in charge of the interpretation and how that impacts their, like, whole power structure.
Exactly. And, Marsilius wasn't alone. Enter William of Ockham, a Franciscan friar who, while he was busy debating about poverty, actually gave people tools to limit papal power. Emphasis on expert interpretation of scripture, chipping away at that idea of the church as the be-all, end-all of biblical meaning.
So we're seeing these little cracks start to appear in traditional authority. Is this around the time that nominalism is appearing too?
It is. And nominalism, that really threw a wrench in the works, intellectually speaking. This new philosophical idea challenged how people understood reality itself. Thinkers like, who was it again? Oh yeah, Ockham. He was no stranger to a little controversy, as we saw. They argued against universal concepts. Very seeing is believing, only individual things are real, they said.
Okay, so how does that change how people see God?
Yeah.
And the Bible?
So for nominalists, God's power was, like, absolute, not bound by these universal laws, total freedom. But, and here's the catch, that created this separation between, like, reason and revelation. If God's will isn't bound by anything, how can our little human minds fully grasp it, right? It's this tension between reason and revelation that keeps popping up.
Okay, so we've got these ideas floating around the 14th century. Who's next? Who picks up this torch of challenging authority?
All right, let's hop over to 14th century England. We meet John Wycliffe. This guy really embodies using the Bible for political means, though not necessarily how he might have imagined it first.
Oh, intrigue. Okay, I like it. Tell me more about Wycliffe. What's his role in all this?
So Wycliffe, he was all about English nationalism and returning to this, like, pure scriptural Christianity. A big thing for him was translating the Bible into English. He was like, everyone should have access, which sounds great, right? Very noble. But it also opened the door for the English monarchy to sort of co-opt religious authority.
So, like, an unintended consequence. He's trying to empower people,
Yeah.
but it ends up empowering the monarchy instead.
Exactly. And guess what? Someone was watching and saw an opportunity.
Uh-oh. Let me guess. Henry VIII saw a chance to use the Bible for his own gain?
Oh, Henry was not one to miss a chance. Remember all that drama with him wanting to break from the Catholic Church? Mary Ann Boleyn? He uses people like William Tyndale, who interpreted the Bible to support, the king's absolute authority, even above the Pope.
So basically, Henry wants a divorce, and the Bible becomes a tool to make it okay, to cement his power. Talk about a power play.
Bold move, right.
Yeah.
Breaks from the Catholic Church, makes himself head of the Church of England, and uses this very specific interpretation of the Bible to justify it. The English Reformation, prime example of politics messing with interpretations of the Bible.
This is where I imagine those cherry-picking accusations get thrown around.
Oh, for sure. And while all this is going down in England, across the channel, there's a whole other firestorm brewing in Germany.
Martin Luther. Protestant Reformation.
Bingo. Luther's revolution, sola scriptura. Scripture alone is the highest authority. He takes on the Catholic Church, their traditions, everything. He's like, individuals should read and interpret the Bible for themselves.
That's huge. But wouldn't that, like, create problems? If everyone's got their own interpretation, wouldn't that be chaos?
$1 million question. Luther's calling for reform might have been about religious freedom, but man, it had huge political consequences. Which, funnily enough, brings us to another fascinating guy, Niccolo Machiavelli.
Ah, Machiavelli. Mr. the Prince. I feel like I can already guess where this is going. He wasn't exactly, like, known for his piety.
You got that right. While the Reformation's raging on, Machiavelli's over there, observing everything. He's busy developing his own take on how religion can be used, or maybe the better word is manipulated, for political gain.
So he's less about the spiritual side of things and more about how it can be used as, like, a control mechanism.
Yeah, you could say that. To him, religion was a tool for social control. He reinterpreted biblical figures, like Moses, through a purely political lens. Leaders. They should prioritize earthly power and stability above everything else, he thought, even if that means using religion to do it.
Wow. So we've gone from kings wanting divorces to, like, straight up manipulation for power. It's like the Bible is like a pawn in this bigger game. So what happens next in this whole tug of war over Scripture?
Buckle up as we head into the 17th century. Get ready for another seismic shift in thinking that will completely rock the world of biblical interpretation. The rise of reason.
Oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Who are the big players in this?
Yeah.
So, like, we're on the verge of the 17th century, right? What's the vibe? What are the big ideas that are going to, like, shake things up?
Okay, so this is where things get really, really interesting. You've got this whole intellectual movement gaining steam, and it's all about reason. Thinkers are questioning everything. They want evidence. They want logic. And, of course, that spills over into how they see the Bible.
So it's not just about blind faith anymore. It's about, like, making faith fit with this new emphasis on, like, reason and proof.
Exactly. And nobody embodies the shift quite like René Descartes. This guy revolutionized how people think about knowledge. Reason and doubt, that's his jam. He wanted to find a totally rational basis for understanding the world.
Okay, but how does that, like, clash with how people have always understood the Bible?
So imagine, right, you have this worldview that's becoming more and more focused on a mechanistic universe. It's all about natural laws, like a giant clock that's perfectly calibrated, and that kind of clashes with how people have traditionally seen miracles, divine intervention stuff that doesn't exactly fit neatly into this predictable, law-abiding world.
So there's this, like, this tension building, the scientific worldview versus the traditional religious one. Someone's going to try to bridge that gap, right?
And that's where Thomas Hobbes comes in. Picture this. 17th century England, civil war is raging, chaos everywhere, and Hobbes is right there in the thick of it. It really messed him up, in a way that, like, changed how he thought.
I can imagine. Witnessing that much upheaval would make anyone crave stability. Like, seriously.
For real. And Hobbes gets fixated on this idea of a strong sovereign, someone who can just impose order on the chaos. And this is where his ideas about the Bible get really interesting and, let's be honest, kind of controversial.
Okay, spill the tea. What's Hobbes' take on the Bible?
He sees religion, or at least the way that everyone's interpreting it differently, as this danger to the social order he wants so badly. Get this. He says that only the sovereign, the king, should be allowed to interpret Scripture. That's how you keep the peace, he says.
Whoa. So we're back to, like, Marsilius of Padua.
Yeah.
The secular ruler knows best. Guess that idea never really went away.
It's crazy how these ideas, like, echo through history. But Hobbes, he takes it even further. He's like, hold up, did Moses even write the first 5 books of the Bible? Boom. Basically saying religion is just, a tool for control in his mind.
So he's not just saying the king should interpret it. He's saying we can't even be sure it's, like, divinely inspired in the first place. This guy's a rebel.
Right. Hobbes was a man of his times, super tumultuous times, and his ideas reflect that. But there's another guy on the scene who takes this whole radical approach to Scripture thing to a whole other level, and that is Baruch Spinoza.
Spinoza? Didn't he get labeled a heretic? Like, a lot?
Just a tad. Spinoza was radical, even more so than Hobbes. He took that reason above all else thing and just ran with it, advocating for a totally rational understanding of the Bible, no exceptions.
So no miracles allowed in Spinoza's world, no divine mysteries.
Not really. He thought God and nature were the same thing, like literally the same. And just like Hobbes, Spinoza's skeptical about who wrote the Bible and how accurate it is. Compiled and edited for political purposes, he says.
It's like the Bible goes from being this ultimate authority to being, like, dissected and analyzed under a microscope.
It's true. Spinoza, he was not afraid to challenge centuries of tradition. And yeah, his ideas, they were controversial, even scandalous to some. But, in a way, he really opened the door for a more critical, historical way of understanding the Bible, even if he didn't mean to.
He's like the godfather of modern biblical criticism. So we've got Hobbes and Spinoza over here pushing for this secular interpretation, stripping away the divine authority in their view. Was anyone around to offer a different perspective? Anyone trying to find a middle ground in this whole reason versus revelation debate?
There was one, John Locke. This guy was all about individual rights and religious tolerance. And he offered a more nuanced view, a kind of bridge between these two seemingly opposite sides.
Okay, so tell me more about Locke. What was his take?
Well, Locke believed in reason, absolutely. He thought it should be our guide when interpreting Revelation, but he didn't throw out the idea of miracles completely or the divine inspiration of the Bible.
So more of a balanced approach.
Yeah.
Sounds more like how people view the Bible today, maybe.
You could say that. Locke was all about rational faith. Focus on the ethics, the morals, rather than getting bogged down in theological arguments. Reason and revelation. They could coexist, even complement each other.
So where do we go from here? We've gone from the church calling all the shots to kings wanting control to guys like Hobbes and Spinoza basically deconstructing the Bible's authority. What's the lasting impact? Like, where does that leave us?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like this intellectual relay race. The baton keeps getting passed, thinker to thinker, interpretation to interpretation. And that brings us to figures like John Toland and Julius Wellhausen.
Okay, who are they? How do they fit into all of this?
Well, think of them as building on what Hobbes and Spinoza started. Toland, he takes Spinoza's ideas and runs with them. He champions this really radical form of Christianity called deism. Imagine a God who creates the universe and then, steps back, lets it unfold according to natural laws. That's deism in a nutshell.
So God's like a watchmaker who winds up the clock and then just watches it go.
Perfect analogy. And then there's Julius Wellhausen. This guy was a 19th century scholar who really shook things up in Old Testament studies.
What did he do?
Wellhausen claimed that the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, they weren't written by Moses, like everyone thought. He said they were actually a bunch of different sources, all mashed together, written at different times.
So he's adding even more layers to who wrote the Bible and how we should interpret it. It seems like with every era, with every new thinker, the Bible becomes less about one single fixed meaning and more about understanding the history and the culture that shaped it.
That's it. That's the key takeaway here. These scholars, whether they meant to or not, they blew the door wide open for modern biblical criticism. The Bible, it's not this monolithic, unchanging document. It's a collection of texts written by different people at different times with their own agendas.
It's amazing to me how something that used to be seen as the ultimate authority could become something that's so open to interpretation, even debate. It makes you wonder how we should even approach the Bible today, with all this in mind. It's like we've gone on this wild ride through history, right? Starting with the church holding all the power, then kings wanting to grab it, then these radical thinkers come in and just turn everything upside down. It's a lot. Where does that leave us today?
Yeah, it really makes you think. After seeing all this, the historical baggage, the competing interpretations, even the straight-up manipulation, how should we even approach the Bible now?
For real. It's not like we can just pretend it never happened. I mean, we're talking centuries of power struggles, philosophical debates, all about this one text.
It's a lot to unpack. And honestly, I think that's the biggest takeaway here. The Bible, it's never existed in some kind of bubble. It's always been interpreted through the lens of whatever is going on at the time, the culture, the politics, you name it.
So you're saying there's no such thing as a, pure interpretation?
That's a tough one. I don't know if there's an easy answer. But I do think we have to at least acknowledge that we all bring our own baggage to the table, right? Our biases, our assumptions, our experiences. It all colors how we read things.
We're adding another layer to this whole historical tapestry with our own interpretations. Yeah.
Exactly. And just like the folks who came before us, those interpretations can be influenced by so many things. Some we're aware of, some we aren't even conscious of.
Makes you think twice when someone's like, this is the one true way to understand it.
Oh yeah. Humility is key, I think. We got to remember, people have been interpreting and reinterpreting this text for centuries. Our understanding is just one small piece of this much bigger, constantly evolving puzzle.
So, okay, where do we go from here? If we can't escape all that historical baggage, how do we even read the Bible in a way that, means something today?
I think it starts with being aware. Knowing that these influences exist, seeing how they've shaped interpretations in the past, that helps us be more critical readers in the present. Ask questions. Consider different viewpoints, even if they make us uncomfortable.
So it's not just about what the text says, it's about understanding the whole context, right? Like who wrote it, why, and when.
Exactly. We've got to dig into the historical context, the cultural norms, even the political climate when it was written.
It's like we need to be history detectives or something, looking for clues, figuring out motives.
I love that because that's what makes studying the Bible so interesting. It's not this dead, unchanging thing. It's a living document that keeps sparking debate, inspiring reflection, challenging us.
This deep dive has been amazing. It's like peeling back layers of history to see how the Bible has been both like a source of hope and a tool for power. Really makes you appreciate how complex it all is.
It really does. And it reminds us that the conversation about the Bible, its role in society, in politics, in our own lives, it's not over.
Not even close. It's a conversation that's still going strong in the 21st century, just like it was back in the 14th. Probably something we'll still be debating for centuries to come.
And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? It keeps pushing us, challenging us to think critically about what we believe, where we fit in.
So I guess if there's one thing our listeners can take away from this whole deep dive, it's that the Bible is not a simple book with simple answers. It's this amazing tapestry of history, culture, politics, and faith, and really understanding its journey through time that can make our own experience with it even richer.
Beautifully said. Knowing its past gives us a chance to make more informed decisions about its role in our present.
This has been a mind-blowing deep dive. You've given us so much to think about. Thanks for joining us.